Welcome to the CFO Show. I'm your host, Melissa Howardson, CFO of Venna. You may notice that today we're recording in a different setup than normal. We had a unique opportunity to have a conversation with a really great guest, so we set up an off-cycle recording to capture today's episode. Small businesses often face a challenge when building out the finance function. You need help with your day-to-day activities like payroll, tax, accounting, AR, and AP. But you also need assistance with things like strategies and planning and analysis and fundraising. It can be hard to find all of these skill sets in just one or two individuals, but you often don't have resources to hire so many people for all of these roles. A great solution can be fractional accounting support. Joining me on the show today is Kendra James-Anderson, founder of the Finance Femme, a virtual CFO consulting service that provides high-quality accounting services. Kendra, welcome to the show.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with the company that you run, the Finance Femme, where you have individuals who are providing fractional CFO services to companies. Tell us a bit more about the company and what was the big aha moment that you had that made you start this company?
So actually back when I was in corporate, before I even knew anything about entrepreneurship and starting a business, I was in corporate doing corporate finance. And so I would sit and support CFOs, and I would sit in on these boardroom discussions and hear how the CFO and the CEO would talk about data and, make decisions based off of all this financial data. Basically, the CEO would not make a move unless the CFO kind of ran the analytics and kind of gave the approval. And I just love that dynamic. And I would remember hearing their conversations. And then meanwhile, I'd have friends who were starting businesses and they were doing great in their businesses. And they had very simple questions about, how much should I pay my employees? Or do I start a retirement account? And they had no, CFO or anyone really to have these conversations with. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great to be able to provide that support to smaller businesses that also need it, but they just didn't have it. And so that's when the idea came about. And slowly that's, how the Finance Femme was created.
And so it sounds like what attracted you is partly those operational aspects. I'm guessing it's a mix of the accounting expertise, but also some of the operating excellence in terms of I've seen this before or what should I do? Whereas sometimes, especially in a small business, they haven't seen that before. Would that be true? Is what attracted you to small business?
Yeah, it was really the gap. It was the sheer fact that I had these friends who, some of them were making millions in their business every year and they didn't have an accountant. Like they didn't have anyone just looking at they didn't have a bookkeeper. And so I was like, okay, how are you making it work? These same folks were cash strapped, yet making millions in their business. And I saw that, okay, you're missing this big gap of clarity and controls in your financials. And so obviously you're out there doing amazing things. You're able to generate all of this income, but you don't have the process and the support that you need to be able to make the proper decisions with the money that's coming in. And so that's really where that need, where that drove me to create this business was because I just saw that huge gap there. And I knew, sitting thinking back on those conversations in the boardrooms where those CEOs had the support of the CFO, I knew that if these CEOs had the support of a CFO, they too would be able to make some really amazing decisions and actually bring their business farther.
What does a day in the life as a fractional CFO look like for you?
Yeah, I would say there's like two main components to it. So there's like what I call like back of the house and then front of the house. So back of the house is, when you're not necessarily engaging with clients, but you are just knee deep in work. So maybe you're looking at their financial statements and kind of creating summaries on what you're seeing out of their financial statements, or you're reading into your team's notes on some questions or issues that they might have seen in the financials that they need some of your advising on. So that back of the house is really when you're knee deep into actual like data analytics, looking at their financial statement. So a perfect example of that might be if we have a client that is opening up a second location, like maybe they're a brick and mortar, but they're opening up a second location and they provide us with a bunch of data on where they're considering the second location and being. where we might take that information, run it through some models to see if it's a good location, if it's a good pricing, how it would impact their financials, create a little summary for them, maybe create a video to explain our findings, send that over to the client. But that's all of that behind the scenes kind of work. And then the other piece of that, the front of the house, is if you're actually having those client meetings. So you might have monthly client meetings, you might have biweekly client meetings, but it's actually walking your clients through those findings. So I would say if I had to split the week out, probably 70% of the week is behind, back of the house work, where you're doing a lot of the analytics. And then that 30% is the front of the house, where you're either answering clients' questions directly or just having meetings with them.
Are there any trends that you're seeing, especially recently, when it comes to small business?
Absolutely. As far as bringing on fractional teams and kind of the support that they're needing.
Yeah, both those trends that regard, but also even in terms of what some of the key areas that they need help with are, or what's top of mind for them.
One of the major things is just team in general. So whether they are, and not even necessarily if they're bringing on a fractional team, but even just their in-house team, are they going to bring on 1099 versus employees? Are they going to bring on full-timers versus part-timers? Really taking a hard look at their team, particularly ever since everything happened with COVID. And there was this huge shift to people going virtual, and then this huge shift of people just quitting their jobs and creating these small businesses. And so all of those changes to the workforce over these last several years has impacted the small business as well. And so one of the largest areas that I see small businesses needing support, or even just having questions around, is the general makeup of their team and what that should look like now versus what it might have looked like, 10 years ago.
And what about any of the environmental factors that you're seeing maybe place more emphasis or cause more stress for the founders and the people you're supporting? I'm thinking about if businesses are more cash constrained, or any supply issues, or some of the other more recent things, interest rates going up, what's happening with the economy. Has that changed any of the areas where you're needing to lean in more to support?
Yeah, I would say where we're seeing that the most is really on the mindset side. So while a company might have the same amount of cash in their bank that they might have had, let's say 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, that money doesn't feel the same way now. If you had 6 months worth of reserves prior to the pandemic, you might have felt great. If you have 6 months worth of reserves now, you might still feel a little nervous, just because you don't know how it's not as predictable as how things were a few years ago. And so there's more, I feel like there's more emphasis on proper saving. Well, proper, right? Because it's in quotation marks because it's subjective, but in saving and ensuring proper cash flow and profitability in your business. There's just more focus there versus sales. So there is a deeper desire for true financial health in the business versus just grow this thing as fast as we can grow it.
Totally makes sense in this current climate that would be the case. When you think then about some of the common things that you're advising to your clients then, especially in this more recent times, are there any top themes that are emerging of the areas where you're having to maybe shine a light or point out some things that small business owners should be aware of?
Yeah. So outside of just team and how to really think about how they want to shape their team, it's going to be things like if you're wanting to expand your offerings. So let's say you have, 4 or 5 key offerings and you're wanting to expand that product suite that you have, whether it's a physical product or a service. It's really doing proper due diligence up front on, is this the right time? And if it is the right time, what is that going to cost? What does that look like? What's the timeline? There's a lot of work on the front end, I think even more so than, the years past, in ensuring that rollout goes properly, just because cash is so key right now. Do you really want to invest in that thing right now? So there's a lot more upfront work and due diligence when it comes to new rollouts.
If somebody was a small business owner, how would they know it's time to start thinking about getting some outside advice and going about evaluating what option makes most sense for them?
Yeah. So if the idea and the work behind your money management in your business is overwhelming, then it's probably about time. If you maybe have an in-house bookkeeper or maybe an outsourced bookkeeper that you're working with, but you feel like you need some more answers or some more advisory type services or some scenario analysis or something along those lines, then it's probably time to consider changing or up leveling the service offering that you're going with. And so I think it's usually just it's that feeling that when something becomes a little bit overwhelming and it's a hindrance instead of a help. I find that if you in this fractional CFO world, if you are able to show that the word or that the numbers are saying something to your clients, then it changes the game for them. Because to your point, they might initially come to you as a fractional CFO or as an accountant, just thinking that I'm just checking off a box, handing this off so somebody can keep my finances in order for taxes, compliance, whatever. But if you can then, yes, check that compliance box, but then also give them the story behind their numbers, then now they no longer just kind of look at the service as just something that has to get done on the back end that they don't have time for or that they don't have the ability to do, but actually something that's helpful to them. And that's when the relationship of like client and CFO really changes, because they're like, oh, wait, I actually look forward to talking to Kendra about my financials because maybe she can help me think through something versus just my money is kind of being handled on the back end. So the story is really important, not just to the actual client, but to almost the value prop of the fractional CFO.
Well, and you talk about that link between the CEO and the CFO and them really seeing them as a partner. And it's becoming clear to me listening and talking to you about how you have managed to pivot that relationship to be that trusted advisor that they really count on to bring into the business to help them with business decisions, not just creating the financials. And along with that, so I understand that Finance Femme has a tried and true framework that you take your clients through. Can you walk us through that?
The first step is all about clarity. So we always say, we can't get to the next step or do the next thing and all this analysis and projections and all of that if we don't just have clarity. So that just starts with really good, clean, solid, compliant books. So once we have that going in order, then after clarity, we go into confidence. And confidence is about looking at our books and our numbers for several months. This might be 3 months. This might take someone 6 months, but it's getting your client to be able to understand and interpret the financial statements on their own. And once they are able to do that, they have this level of confidence that they didn't have before that then allows them to have amazing conversations with you about the strategy that you think up. Because you don't want to think up all of these great strategies for them and want to implement things that could be a game changer in their business if they don't fully understand it. So before we jump into strategy, we have to have that clarity, then that confidence. And then from there, really the next step which is the last step, is either stabilizing or scaling. And I think oftentimes people assume it has to be scaling, scale, grow. If you're not growing, you're dying. But that's not always the case. Sometimes just stabilizing and just staying in a nice stable state is fine for that season. So we understand the client's needs, where they are in their life, what they're wanting. And then we determine, once we get through clarity and once we get through confidence, if we're going to stabilize or if we're going to scale.
And I love how you differentiate that between that stabilizing and scaling, because that is a decision that needs to be consciously made by the business, and both are okay, but it's important to know which path you're on. Let's talk for a minute about that scaling side. How have you helped some of your clients in terms of realizing then the growth and the scaling that they might have needed?
Usually it starts with a plan. So we'll create, whether it's a financial model or a financial plan, but we'll create that plan to understand financially how it's going to roll out, as well as operationally how it's going to roll out. So plans can be as detailed and amazing as possible, but they're still not going to go 100% according to that plan. So you have to be able to pivot as well. But at least starting with that plan gives everyone on your team as a CFO side, but then also on the client's team, it gives them that marching orders on what to work on and what the impact is going to be. So we always start with that plan.
Tell me a little bit then about what role you and your team might play in terms of some of the more daily operational aspects of the company.
Here's kind of how I always frame it up. Your financials is really just the output of your day-to-day operations, right? So your revenue is like your sales is not a number that you are actually creating. It's the end product of the orders that you made, the pricing that you've created. So we always help the client work on the things that actually create the financials versus always focusing on the financials themselves. The financials is after the fact, right? So a lot of the active day-to-day work and the things that you can do to impact the output of the financials is in your day-to-day operation. So it's in looking at if you're a product-based business, if your average orders on a weekly basis has dropped 20%, why? What happened? Is something wrong with the website? Or if your close rate with your sales team has plummeted, or they were closing 60% of their calls and now they're only closing 30%. What happened? Is something up with morale? So it's looking at the actual day-to-day inputs, because that's what's going to help drive the change to the output, which is your financials.
What a great lens to view that through. Now, one thing that some might think could get in the way of being able to effectively help the business on a fractional basis would be staying plugged in and connected with what's happening in the business ongoing. How do you structure yourself, or what are the things you do so that you can efficiently stay connected without needing to be there all the time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the key things is going to be what does your operations look like as a fractional CFO? So we have like a client portal. Within our client portal, we have certain team members assigned within each client's project with certain cadence of like check-ins. So a lot of automation is used in order to make sure that there are those check-ins, that we're getting certain data points. So, to the point about the order values and things like that, that's all pulled automatically on the back end and kind of just dumped into a feed. So there has to be not a lot, but there has to be some automation created in order to gather that data, and then some kind of a routine cadence on your end or on your team's end to review it. So one of the big things that I always suggest to those who are kind of considering fractional CFO work is to really pick a lane or pick a niche or a niche, right? Because that really helps once you create an operation or create like a SOP for how to pull all the operational data for a product-based business. If they're on a common site like a Shopify, you can just recreate that for the next client. And so if you have a lot of clients that are similar, you're creating the SOP once or twice, and you can apply it to all of your clients. So to answer your original question, for us, it's all about creating these SOPs and kind of automating certain things. And that allows us to really be able to stay dialed into a lot of our clients.
And tell me a bit about how your company has evolved over time in terms of the size, types of clients you serve, and even the way that you structure your teams to serve the clients.
When I started back in 2016, it was while I was still in corporate. My very first client, I actually made my first hire. She's a contractor, but made my very first team member onboarding because I knew from the beginning I did not want to be the sole person doing all of the work. So with my very first client, I actually hopped on Upwork and found someone, and she's still with me to this day. These years later, she's now my accounting director, actually. So started with her then. It was just me and her, and we slowly just built out the team as needed. But we initially just offered bookkeeping and financial reporting services. And then that was able to kind of scale to bring in the fractional CFO support, which is where I really thrive because my background is in finance, which is accounting. But I really had to set up that accounting team first because I couldn't do my CFO work without the proper accounting. So once that was built out, we could add on the CFO layer, and then we started to add on the tax layer. So it has evolved over these years, and really the need, the client's need is what kind of drive or drove what we expanded into. Taxes was something I never planned on touching, and literally held off on it for about 7 years, the first 7 years in business. And we finally just got caved because our clients were like, we need you to do it. So, but yeah, that's how it kind of expanded over time.
Well, and I think it's interesting to hear that journey because you touch on the beauty of why fractional can work so well for small business, because they need bits and pieces of a variety of things that those skill sets aren't all necessarily always residing in one person. You joke about tax. I'm the same. Taxes, I know enough high level, but not in the details. And even within tax, sometimes there's different niche specialties. And so they get the best of all the worlds with what you're offering, because you can give them the skill set they need without them needing to have each one of those be a full-time person or sacrificing one for the other.
Absolutely. And knowing that we are all part of the greater team, they're not having to be that middleman, which I feel like before, when we weren't offering taxes, that was a big, feeling that some of our clients were having, was like, oh, I got to put you into contact with our CPA. And then they had to kind of have the conversation between the two teams. And so, when you offer that fractional service that has these kind of individual, almost like departments or divisions, it is definitely advantageous in that way to the client to be able to support them.
Let's step back for a minute and talk about the name, because, the Finance Femme, and there's, I think, a background there in terms of even the types of clients you're serving. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about the name and where you're focused?
Yeah, so I always knew from the very beginning that I wanted to support women-owned businesses. And so I wanted to make sure that came through and was easy to kind of put out there. And so that's how the name came about. And since we've launched, we have focused in on supporting women-owned businesses. And we do that because, I knew also very early on when I had those first few clients, the conversations that I was having with them, they were just tired of being like mansplained with their financials and, not being taken seriously by certain financial professionals that were, supporting some maybe larger companies that thought that they just weren't, important enough. And so I really wanted to focus in on supporting women also because I know that we just carry a lot. Like we do a lot, we're kind of leading our households and our friendships and our relationships and our children. And like, there's a lot that's on our shoulders. And so when it comes to business, we just really need support, period. But especially if you are a woman who is, really, bringing in some money and you're needing to understand how to best utilize that in your business, we really just need that support. And so I focus in on women-owned businesses.
Along those lines, you've started now your own business. You took that chance, which for any small business owner, that's a risky thing to do. What advice would you give to women and their teams who are either early entrepreneurs or thinking about taking that plunge and becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing is to definitely make the move, if it's something that you are passionate about and something that's been on your mind, then definitely take those steps. The saying of like, oh yeah, just jump, just jump and go for it. I don't know that I would necessarily say just jump and go for it, but I would definitely say, start putting one foot forward in front of the other and start just like making the move, and know that it's very possible that as you're kind of making the move in the direction that you're wanting to go, you might get a mile down the road and then realize that you have to maybe pivot a little bit or change a little bit here. And that's fine. That's all part of the process. So, the biggest thing though is to just take those steps forward, because you won't know what pivots to make and you won't know the lessons and learn those lessons until you're actually moving forward.
Great advice. Thank you, Kendra, so much for joining me for this discussion, helping us better understand the work that you do and what it can mean for businesses. Now, whenever we have guests on the show, we do have 2 rapid fire questions that we like to ask them. So are you ready?
Absolutely.
All right. First one. What is the best piece of business or leadership advice that you've received?
It wasn't verbal advice. It was advice that I saw. All of my bosses when I was in corporate, every single one of them, I've been very blessed to have amazing bosses. And every single one of them have shown me a component of leadership that is super important. And so from that, like one boss was really amazing at making sure that the team always felt supported. And another boss was very good at making sure that she knew you as just a person, just understanding your life as a person. So I would say, really just focusing in on leadership skills as you build out your team. Your team is your most important asset. And as you build out your team, working on your own leadership skills to be able to make sure that your team is solid and happy. that's probably the key for me.
Great advice. And a second question, what is a book that's had the most impact on you? And that can be business or personal.
I would say it's definitely going to be a John C. Maxwell book. So probably the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth.
And what is it about that book that really resonates with you?
How he breaks down every single law, like quote unquote law, but how he breaks down every law in a meaningful way, like a purposeful way, and not just, some self-help books are like, you have to do this or you won't become this. And it's not that at all. It's very much just, you should learn these different techniques and these different ways of being, because it's about being a good human, not just a good business owner or a good leader, but being a good human. And so you can kind of take it into different aspects of your life.
I'm going to have to read that one for sure, putting it on the list. Kendra, thank you so much for joining me and having this conversation today. Have really appreciated it.
It's been amazing. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to learn more about today's topic, please visit the links in the show notes. And if you like what you heard, please leave us a review on any of the streaming platforms. We always love to hear from our listeners, and it helps others to find the show. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts, because you don't want to miss an episode. For the CFO Show, I'm Melissa Howardson. Until next time.